What's next for a neighborhood under siege? We'll have to wait and see. Reporting live, Sadie Sinclair, Channel 7 News.
This is San Francisco.
Welcome back to San Francisco, where people in power love to trick people into misdirecting their angst with their own lives towards other people. They've decided that in 2025, scapegoating immigrants and sex workers is the thing to do. Two people who do organizing with migrant sex workers, Chanelle Gallant and Elene Lam, came out with a new book. It's called Not Your Rescue Project. Chanelle I know through Miss Major, who I co-wrote a book with and who has also done a lot of sex worker organizing in the past. Elene co-founded Butterfly, the Asian and Migrant Sex Workers Support Network, and we talk about what they learned in talking to hundreds of sex workers over the course of putting this book together. I am so stoked to welcome Elene Lam and Chanelle Gallant to the podcast. Chanelle is someone that I met through my mentor, friend of ours, Miss Major, and we've been doing some exchanges around the topics that we're talking about today. Chanelle and Miss Major have both been doing organizing with a feminist lens on sex work, and we'll talk a bit about what that even means later in the conversation. But both my guests put out a new book that just came out. It's called Not Your Rescue Project. And everybody can go out, check out the show notes, and we'll link to where you can find it. Thank you both for coming on.
Thank you. Thank you. Thanks for having us.
First off, I wanted to ask how you two met each other.
Yeah. Our lore, it goes way back. Elene and I actually met in the fall of 2013 because I was working for a sex work organization in Toronto, and Elene walked in basically to just say hi and be like, "Hi, I'm in town, I'm visiting. I wanted to drop by the local sex work organization." And I had started this program there. And she was just like, "Yeah, I'm from Hong Kong. I was the director of Z-Tang." And like on our walls were the posters for the organization that she had been the director of. And I knew who Z-Tang was. And I was like, "Oh, that's so fucking cool. They do such badass work. Can we talk? Like, I'd love to get your number." And then we did. And I think we probably met up in my backyard. Hey, Elene?
Yes, and I think the follow-up in your backyard conversation is mainly, we see the missing part, right? Because it's very interesting when we were in Maggie, so there were very few Asian sex worker, and despite, at that time is the sex worker group is doing the Constitution Challenge, and they say, we heard that the police is stopped, arresting the sex worker, but what I found is very different from migrant sex workers. They still facing the policing and arrest. So that's why it's having the dialogue to see whether we can do something related to migrant sex workers. So that's how we work very closely together. I still remember I actually was in school, so that I asked Chanelle, should I stay to continue the sex worker organizing, or should I go back? And then Chanelle said, "What can I do to make you stay?" That.
Yeah. So this is happening up in Toronto.
This was in Toronto.
Elene, would you speak to some of the work that you were doing back in Hong Kong before you came to Toronto?
Yes, so I work in a sex worker organization for 10 years. So it's also doing sex work organizing. So, but at that time, because there is anti-trafficking movement, so that is harming the Asian migrant sex workers. So that's why we also have a lot of chance to go to different countries to meet the sex worker groups in other places. I learned so much, particularly, the sex worker organizing in global South is so different, right? So that's why when I came to Toronto, I also want to learn about how the sex worker organize, and particularly when we were in Asia that is like, well, we are fighting for decriminalization of sex work. And then at that time, like Canada is just win the Supreme Court case, so that hope that maybe we, situation will change, but definitely it's not this way, right? So I think that is but I think organizing is the very important part, because I think the way sex work group organize is quite different in North America, because North America is often like emphasize on identity politics, but many Asian sex worker organization, particularly in Asia, is using labor organizing. So that like how to organize, how to have the movement, the collective power is a bit different. So yeah, that is my background. That is also inform my approach of organizing when I moved to Canada.
That's super interesting that, yeah, you're making this distinction between some of the identity-based organizing here in the US versus labor specific. Well, of course, there's, some overlap there, but could you speak to, like, was this how when you founded Butterfly, which if you could speak to like what Butterfly is and how it came about, was that part of the thinking behind it? Was this like labor focused kind of underlying it all? Was this labor focus?
Yeah. I think it's because when I moved here, there is like starting a lot of discussion about human trafficking. What we hear is like some of the local, particular white sex workers say, "I'm not trafficked." You see that Asian women are being trafficked, right? And also, like despite like different sex worker have the voice being heard, but we do not really see a lot of voice from Asian sex worker and also migrant sex worker, because their experience are very, very different, right? So and that's why Butterfly is Asian and migrant sex worker support network. So is doing the organizing, building the leadership is the center. So when I talk about the labor rights model, is not only fighting for labor rights, but it's like how to organize the power. And particularly what we do is we do a lot of direct support, because many workers may face a lot of issue that they may not able to involve the movement immediately, right? So that we really need a process. But we also need a lot of different way make the voices being heard. And particularly, we use art, we use like different creative way. Instead of like go to protest, we may like put a massage bed in a Chinatown festival to do massage as the way to do protest. That is more comfortable by the that the worker feel more comfortable, but also having the collective voices to push back, Asian women passive traffic victim, but also doing the a lot of like mutual aid, a lot of community support, but also doing a lot of advocacy to speak out the right in different policy making process. And I think this is very core. I think the organizing and have this collective power and speaking out, I think is very important. Yeah.
Well, yeah, that's so interesting. And again, on this issue of like, making sure that the idea of like labor rights is front and center. Given minimum wages have been stagnant for so many people for so long in the US and in Canada, like, and labor conditions more generally for most people, and in particular immigrants, what are the reasons, and I'll ask, like, open this to both of you, like, what are the reasons that sex work could be one of the best options around when people are thinking about how am I going to make ends meet?
Yeah. I think for many Asian migrant sex worker here, so like before they have been working in many different industry, right? So, but because of the precarious immigration status, because of the racism, in job market, because the language barrier they face, so often they even get lower than the minimum wage in many industries. So doing sex work, and for many people, like they can have better income, but also the flexibility of the work depends on different social circumstances. But like the people may have like more flexibility, and how they can also gain different social access in the work, right? The people don't talk about. They may have more clients that help them to navigate the life. They have more support network. So that is also the thing the worker can gain. And I think Chanel have done a lot of work to look at the racial labor. I don't know whether you want to talk about this, but I think for many people think, oh, they took very low income, that is their oppression. But then for many workers, actually, this is the resistance, no matter how low of the income. For them, is actually better than many other kind of workplace, right? Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. If you don't have anything to add here, Chanelle, maybe I could ask you to talk about an issue that we've spoken about at least once on the podcast before, which is this idea of decriminalization versus legalization. And I'm guessing this is something you've had to give a spiel about many times before, but for people who aren't familiar, could you speak to what the distinction is between decriminalization and legalization as we get deeper into this conversation? I think it's important for people to have that distinction in mind.
Sure. Yeah, I can clarify that a bit. And I'm going to build on what Elene was just saying, because we're talking about a group of people who are criminalized not just for their sex work, but as importantly for their immigration status.
Yeah.
So really what the book is about like how migrant sex workers are caught in this carceral web where everything they do can be criminalized by some law, some policy, some regulation, or like obscure enforcement of like professional bodies, regulations. There's always something there. So it's really not just about the criminalization of sex work, but I am going to talk about that. But for folks to understand how dangerous it is when a worker is deportable. If a worker is deportable, they cannot risk things like unionizing, like, organizing, like public advocacy, because you're acknowledging you're doing a type of work which could get you whisked off into an ICE van.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So it's like that's, and in many ways that criminalization can be easier to pursue and easier to enforce than criminal code violations where you have to have evidence. The police, ICE has the evidence. Show me your papers. If you don't have them, that's the evidence. Yeah. Right? So the criminalization of undocumented migration can actually be much more vicious, brutal, invasive than the criminalization of sex work. Not across the board, but just saying it's a very powerful tool to break worker power and to create terror and chaos in communities. You know what else they can do? What else the cops can do? So you've got the criminalization of sex work. You've got the immigration regulations, which prohibit sex work. So migrant sex workers are subjected to the longest continuous travel ban in U.S. history. It's the first one, 1875, the Page Act. It precedes the Chinese Exclusion Act because it was the wedge that created the kind of legal and moral precedent for the Chinese Exclusion Act. The U.S. didn't start with the Chinese Exclusion Act. It started with a fake anti-trafficking bill, an anti-slavery regulation called the Page Act, named after a racist Republican who had been pushing to ban Chinese people from the US for years and failing. And then they found the thing that could create the crack, which was to target Chinese women who were of, who were believed to be at risk of or a potential for engaging in prostitution once they entered the US. And of course, this was sold as being for their own good, to protect them. But in practice, what it meant was that US officials got to question every single Chinese woman who wanted to come to the US to assess her morals. And by the time the Chinese Exclusion Act was passed in 1882, there were less than 200 Chinese women coming into the US a year. They'd already de facto banned them.
Wow. So using the sex worker who had come from China as like this specter in a way to cover up some, probably some political BS that they were.
It was the federal race ban. It was the first federal race-based immigration ban. And they chose Chinese sex workers to do it, Chinese women specifically, who could be associated with sex work, because it was a way to get away with it. So, I just want to like, your question for me though is about decriminalization and legalization. I will briefly summarize that by here's a little parallel that might make sense to folks. Remember when homosexuality was still in the criminal code?
Yeah.
Legalization would have been that to have gay sex, you needed to get a license from the government.
Right.
That's legalization.
Right,
Does that sound like freedom? Does that sound good for gays?
No.
And maybe you have to only have gay sex in specific parts of the city.
Right.
That are districted, that are under surveillance, and that are surrounded by police. That's the only place you could, and you had to have a license to enter that area to have the gay sex. That's legalization. Obviously, that's horrible. Now, what they did instead was they decriminalized homosexuality, which is just where you take it entirely out of the criminal code. Right. Legalization leaves it in the criminal code, only now it's highly regulated by the state. And you actually can end up, and you have in the US has legalization in Nevada, you end up with more arrests. Nevada has the highest arrest rates. I think it's Las Vegas County has the highest sex work arrest rates in the country, and it's legalized zone. So it's a scam. It's a government scam. It's a scam so that it's the state and the big businesses who own those like sex work businesses who own the brothels. It's so that they can like work in cahoots and make money over a highly surveilled and controlled body of workers. And then everybody who doesn't follow those rules and doesn't have your little sex license gets busted.
Yeah, that's super helpful for understanding, what we're talking about when the state gets involved in all this. And we talked a little bit about this, but wondering if we could get into this idea of like the anti-trafficking sort of industry, like the savior industry that exists definitely here in the US. I think every time that you go into a hotel, I was at a Hilton in Baltimore last weekend, and you go into the bathroom and there is a huge advertisement on the wall with a number to call if you suspect somebody is being sex trafficked. Of course, like, what this means, it's so vague. But yet, so this is something that exists, I think, in most hotels in states across the US. The anti-sex trafficking industry has certainly like gotten the ear of a lot of politicians out there to make this a thing that anytime you're taking a trip, you might see one of these notices. Could you speak to what these anti-sex trafficking groups are, what they're trying to do, what they say they're trying to do, and what they actually do?
Chanelle, do you want to talk about that?
I thought you were going to take that one.
Okay, yes, okay.
Cool.
So why we want to call them industry? It's really their industry. They keep producing traffic victim and benefit themselves, right? So, and then the stakeholder work together, as you say, the politician, the government, if particularly the law enforcement. So, and also a lot of NGO, the corporate, and also like the NGO, particularly with the anti-sex work gender organization, Causeway Feminists, and also the evangelical organization, all of them are benefit, right? So the politician is very difficult to get the support. But then when they say anti-trafficking, even left and right, no matter who you are, you will still jump into support because it's being give the illusion. So this is something, is human rights, this is protect the people, and no one can argue about that, right? So and they are very successful. But what actually anti-trafficking work do? It's not about protection, never about protection. It's about how to use anti-trafficking to cover the anti-sex work agenda. How use it to cover the racist agenda, how to cover the border control, the expand the border control not only at the border, but then how they can have the surveillance of migrant in different places in that workplace in the city, right? And so the how to cover up to use human trafficking to increase the state power and state violence against particularly the sex worker in the name of protection, right? So evangelical organization, they can impose the moralistic agenda because before I hate sex work is bad, sex work is evil, so we need to eradicate them. But now they say, no, I really care about the safety of this woman.
Right.
I rescue them. So
Yeah.
they can benefit by impose the moralistic anti-sex work value. But the NGO, and particularly, I don't want to call them casual feminists because they love police more than the woman. Like the anti-sex work group, they claim they are the feminists, but then actually they are benefit. We see a lot of them is the white savior. They get so much funding, they can fly all over the world. They get so much power through that. And media, how much like money they can make from that, right? And I went to US to have a conference. There was a lunchbox is called Freedom. So they rescue the traffic victim and make them be the volunteer, unpaid worker to make the lunchbox for us. That you stop them from earning about $100 per hour, and then rescue them and force them need to work in factory and provide the free food for you.
To volunteer for
Right?
these organizations
Right.
that are shaming them the entire time. Yeah, it's nefarious.
But then they got at the same time they got tons of funding. So many CEO got 3 times of increase of the salary after they got trafficking funding, right? So that is like that's why we call it industry is everyone is benefit except the people who are in vulnerable situation, not the sex worker, not the migrant, or even the people they claim to rescue them, right? So at individual level, some people may get some benefit, including housing, including some of the like tangible support, but the whole anti-trafficking work, but just make the oppression system be stronger, surveillance, more bigger scale, and also at the end most of the people get arrested, detained, and deported, right? So and I think I go back to your question. You talk about the decriminalization and anti-trafficking work now is really expand the causeway web, right? If we see criminalization is more than just criminal law, we see the criminalization is create the illegality of your body, of your identity, and then they can impose the law and regulation on you, and they can impose the state's violence, right? One of the example is the Asian massage parlor. So how they can play out this like racist idea. So for example, in City of Toronto, in our book also mentioned about it in 2018-19, they proposed to shut down all the Asian massage parlor in the name of protect the woman, because one of the organization and Canadian Center to End Human Trafficking, they got $40 million to run the hotline, but that actually is like the Polaris in US. Like, but then they do the lobbying, and then the city decide they want to shut down of the massage parlors. They can is protect the woman. How you can protect the woman by shutting down the business, right?
By
How
taking the job. Yeah.
bring in more law enforcement. So that is the example to see the anti-trafficking industry is not about protection, it's not about like fighting the human rights, but is use this name to cover all the harm they have done. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. And people may, people who are listening to this podcast will have heard of the prison industrial complex. And this is very much like part of that, a very, very big part of it. I was wondering if you or one of you would kind of define for people what we mean when we say carceral feminists, for people who might not know.
Elaine, you want me to?
Yes, you can go ahead.
Okay. Carceral feminists. My arch nemesis. Carceral feminists are people who are claimed to be feminists, but the solution that they understand that will liberate women and that will free women from oppression and from violence is the carceral state. So it's like systems of criminalization, punishment, and captivity. It's the idea that women are going to be freed not by each other, not by solidarity, not by, mass movements, but by things like strict laws, tight borders, police with, police enforcement and police power, prisons and long prison sentences, detentions and deportations, and then all of the kind of web of carceral power into other sectors of society. Like, okay, in order to keep women safe, we need cameras, we need surveillance, we need cops in schools to keep girls safe, we need mandatory reporting of suspected domestic violence in hospitals, and all these things which we actually have evidence that show that they don't reduce violence against women and don't encourage women's liberation. They empower the state, not women.
Yeah.
And so, and these ideas are very common and very normal. And it's where many of us start out with, because this is what we're all told. We're all told that if only, the state took seriously sexual and domestic violence and, really enforced the laws and convicted abusers, then women would be free from violence. And that doesn't work. I mean, even the evidence, for example, showing that when they're in countries with a death penalty, it actually increases the rate of more severe violence against women. And so we're abolitionist feminists who see a really different solution to gender justice, which is about empowering. It's really not. It's actually understanding the state as one of our enemies. Understanding this, recognizing that state violence is gendered violence that must be opposed through solidarity among women and solidarity across movements, like to actually build our power, not the power of the cops.
Yeah. I think it's like, so it's as easy as looking at the people who are charged with upholding the laws that keep the carceral state going. So that the cops who, if you look at the rates of like domestic abuse, it's so much higher among the cops than like pretty much any other demographic. Something that I think is not talked about enough. Like, this is who we're entrusting with upholding these laws that we say we want to protect people such as sex workers when we're building this infrastructure of the carceral state. Elene, did you have something to add?
Yeah, I think that it's because this is very interesting, and particularly who are these casual feminists, right? So, like, I remember when we were in City Hall, so because of the anti-trafficking group lobbying, so the city should have like more investigation, more prosecution in massage parlor in order to address the issue of human trafficking. And what happened is actually there is excessive investigation, the massage parlor being investigated even 20 times in a week, and a lot of tickets. Some people get like 20 tickets, in a day. And so, and also that is also a lot of abuse happen. So like, for example, the law enforcement would came in and ask the workers to take off the robe, take off the clothes. If you have sexy underwear, they think, okay, you're the sex worker, I will give you more fine and I target you more. So even hear this story, I was so surprised those quasi feminists, they claim they protect and care about the woman rights. They are silenced. They even say, okay, then we need to send more by law enforcement officer because they are human trafficking, and they do not listen to any story. And I think that how racism, classism play out, particularly with this, like, particularly we see a lot of them is like the white feminists. They think that they have power over other women's body, right? They feel that you don't know anything. I know better than you, so that I can offer the solution. You are too vulnerable. You don't have to say. And behind is like you are disposable. You are not valued. That, like, let me design your life. You work in a massage parlor, despite the worker keeps saying, no, I earn much more than in the restaurant. I have more autonomy. I can sit down. I can play my phone. But they say, no, 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 you don't know that. Let me ask the law enforcement to rescue you, to put you in shelter. That kind of like complexity. And I think that is the book we really try to, like, calling for more support people from the left, because what we find is very interesting. We have like more allies, from the left. They recognize the harm of the, like, carceral system. They are anti-policing, they are anti-prison. But when they go to the anti-human trafficking issue, suddenly they think, okay, anti-human trafficking is good. But what is the solution? Again, is like they are, and particularly many carceral feminists, they call themselves abolitionists, right? They our cooperate our language, and they stolen the language. They want to kill sex industry, right? They want to abolish sex industry, but they stolen the term abolitionist and make people confused. And then they are successful, continues to promote the, like, carceral agenda, to promote the racist anti-migrant agenda. And then, like, that's why we see, like, we were so surprised when we do the organizing. We also found a lot of people, suppose they are the left, should be with us. Why you are standing there asking for more police when you see police is, like, problematic, right? And also when we see the policing is not only by police, it's also by law enforcement, and also by social worker, right? So now social work become the pipeline of policing, and the level of policing is much more, like, they can police even how you eat, how you take care of your children, how you behave, who can you talk to with the phone. They can, like, the kind of invasive, like, impose the law against you to your body, and even, like, stronger, than the certain extent is a kind of prison that you need to carry and live every day, right? So that's why we find carceral families is so dangerous. So that's why one of the purpose of the book is really help people to look at what actually happened, who are these people, what they are doing, that how you can see the picture, and then how you can not be part of it, but, like, how to continue, align with your own value and agenda to support the migrant sex worker, instead of, like, support the anti-trafficking industry, right?
Yeah, and I think you both have done such a good job in collecting so many interviews with people who are directly affected by the laws that we're talking about right now. And I know that Dylan Rodriguez, who's been on the podcast a few times, also blurbed the book, and he was on last to talk about the Stop Asian Hate movement that really, like, kicked off around the Atlanta mass shootings in 2021 at a massage parlor in Atlanta, and often disappeared from the telling of that incident is that people were, in some cases, sex workers who had been killed by potentially a client. And as a result of those people dying, you then had this whole other Stop Asian Hate sort of carceral nonprofit movement where the Asian American Foundation, which was created later that year, in the matter of 6 months, raised $1 billion. And their message has been since 2021 is, hire more cops. We need more, Asian FBI agents. And as so many of the people in this book, so many of the interviewees will attest, that is not the way that we're going to find anything close to liberatory future. So thank you again for collecting all of these stories. Wondering if, you wanted to talk about some of these stories, and also about that idea of the co-optation that these organizations are doing around an issue that I think the left should be a lot more aligned on, and yet there is division who see this anti-sex trafficking industry and all of a sudden applauding these ideas that are carceral.
Yeah, I think that like for our organizing work, the voices and experience of the community is most important and so central, right? So that's why in this book we also include a lot of like voices from the community different way. Some of them is like the publication of Butterfly has been doing. We collect the story, and particular some of them is using for like advocacy. Some of them is like the submission, to the government to tell the reality, right? So because when we see the newspaper is how good is the rescue, but what is the reality that the impact, how actually people being arrested, detained, and deported. Some of the interviewee, they also talk about how sex work itself can be so powerful. The reason they come in is not necessary as, people fantasize, like happy hooker story or like very vulnerable being packed in a box to bring it here. But the complexity, like how the autonomy, agency, but also vulnerability all play out together. But you can also see the powerful of resistance, right? So no matter the individual resistance or the collective resistance, and I think the traffic victim narrative is so powerful, particularly on the Asian woman body, is because the racist idea, Asian women are passive, they don't speak English, they cannot consent, they don't know what they are doing. That's why they need the rescuer, no matter social worker, law enforcement to rescue them. They need a white savior, to save them. But I think the story, no matter what kind of story, that sharing, I think that showing their own agency, showing their unique experience, I think this is very powerful and important to push back that narrative, right? So no matter what limitation of option they have life, they still, using different way to, and I think Chanelle and I have a lots of conversation, and particularly to show the complexity, as racialized, as migrant, there is a lot of vulnerability. It's not because of sex work, right? It's because of racism, classism, and make the migrant itself is vulnerable. So that's why as migrant sex worker, they also face those kind of oppression. But how sex work actually give them unique experience that maybe also because of the criminalization stigma they have, face extra trauma, fear, extra experience with encounter negatively with law enforcement or fear of arrest and deportation, but also what they can gain, the autonomy, the complexity of sexuality and relationship. And I think, I think this is my honor to have chance to listen to so many workers, in so many years, so that I also want to take this opportunity to thank you for them. And some of them is not with us anymore. Some of them is still fighting with us. And I think keep create more platform to make the voices being heard. I think this is also very important. So I hope you guys will also, when you read the book, also like not only read by your eyes, use your hearts to feel the story. And I hope that you can like see that how many powerful, great, beautiful people in front of you and staying in your heart.
Yeah, I mean, that's such a huge part of this project that I really appreciate, is just getting some of these stories that are not like you said, if the mainstream media is going to report on incidents like the mass murder at the massage parlor in Atlanta, the interviewees that they're going to go to first are going to be people from, for example, organizations like the carceral feminists at anti-sex trafficking NGOs. But Chanelle, did you have anything to add?
I did. Now I'm trying to remember what it was. Yeah, I just want to say, the book includes significant stories from workers that were collected by Butterfly that really capture the range of experiences of people in the sex industry or in massage parlors. And what we find is like how few organizations are actually interested in those stories and actually interested in the politics that come out of migrant sex worker work and community and resistance, and the co-optation actually that happens of their experiences of, you know, oppression or harm or violence by organizations that do nothing to advocate for the policies they actually need, the support that people actually need. And that's why it's so important. And that's why it's wild that this is the first book. This is the first book that is rooted in the politics, the community, the stories, and the resistance of migrant sex workers in the US and Canada.
Yeah,
And
it's huge. Thank you.
which is wild, given that the narratives about migrant sex workers have been used to push carceral policies, border policies, anti-migrant policies, gentrification in Chinatowns all over the continent.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Without the respective, like, solidarity and respect for the people who are there actually on the front lines experiencing and resisting this. And so I want to also just thank our publisher, Haymarket, because we were at our word length and we're like, we really want to include these stories. And they let us make the book longer because we were like, we really think the book absolutely needs the first person stories of the community. And so they're all in there.
So you end the book with this list of actionable items that people who want to be in solidarity with people who are migrant sex workers can do. Would you speak to a couple of these?
So yeah, we've got this whole chapter called The Butterfly Effect, Solidarity, and the World We Dream of. And because the idea for the book is to bring people into action. We don't just want to inform people. We want to be like, great, now you understand a bit more. And now you understand a bit more about your stake and how migrant sex workers are being used to advance a really right-wing agenda and why you want to bring migrant sex workers into your movements. But how are you going to do that? So let's see. A couple of them are, let's see. The first one we put is to start from a place of joint struggle, not saviorism. And by that, we mean we want you to do some thinking about how you think migrant sex workers' oppression affects you. Right? So the whole point, the book's called Not Your Rescue Project. The whole point is to push back on the idea that migrant sex workers need someone to save them versus that they need to be in joint struggle and big movements with allies who also understand that they have a stake. So, for example, some questions you might want to ask yourself. Does the oppression of migrant sex workers in your community legitimize policing? Does it legitimize immigration control? Or does it push gentrification in by shutting, working class massage businesses down in Chinatowns so that developers can get their hands on the land and turn it into more expensive businesses? Does it push white supremacist ideologies that see migrants and as permanent outsiders and as a danger to public safety or the American family? Does it promote the punishment of women or migrants who step out of line? So that's that's the first place we start with, is we encourage you to just kind of understand your own stake before and then before some of the other steps, which are, for example, to include migrant sex workers in any activism that you're doing. Like campaigns to defund the police could include campaigns to defund anti-trafficking police units and keep the police out of migrant massage businesses, or, including sex workers in labor movements by decriminalizing sex work. And this is going to be increasingly important. Including migrant sex workers in immigration fights, in migrant justice fights, to remove the penalties against migrant sex workers. And those are a few of them.
Thank you. Yeah, thank you so much. I feel like we've covered a bit, and hopefully people have learned something to take away from this conversation. I have personally was wondering how people can follow both of your work, in addition to getting the book, which again we'll link in the show notes. How can people find you online?
And so our Butterfly has social media. We have Instagram. So, and maybe you can help, to post Twitter. But I think we want to mention the book is not only the book put on the shelf, right? We really want to have this book as the tools of the movement. So that's why at the end of the book, we also talk about the action item. So because people may have different, role, in and like in different space. So that, but taking action, I think is very important. That how you can support us to do the organizing, how you can support us to, advocate for the change, how you can support us to help to change other people's mind, particularly our voice is not able to reach out to so many people because we have very limited platform. So, and I want to say thank you for giving us this opportunity, but like how to take action, because this is the book for action. Yeah.
You can find me at chanellegallant.com or on social media. And maybe by the time this comes out, there'll be a little website for the book. Not sure yet, but hopefully.
All right, we'll check for that. Cool. Thank you so much. And
thank you.
Yeah, I'm excited to see we'll kind of hear about the events that you all have scheduled coming up, and hopefully you'll come through the Bay, and then we'll definitely push that out to our people here. But yeah, thanks for your work. All right.
Thank you. Thanks for bringing us on.
Thank you for listening to Sad Francisco. I am Toshio Meronek, and my co-producer is Tofu Estolas. Patreon.com/Sad Francisco is where you can find our past episodes and transcripts, and it's also where you can help us out with a donation. And if you do, it comes with some benefits like getting the episodes a few days early, and our gratitude for allowing us to keep making this podcast, which we love to do. See you next time in Sad Francisco.